This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live.
Hello and welcome to the Sunday Lunchtime Show. Thanks for joining me. Today my guest is Kate, who is mother to two children with autism and ADHD. Kate decided to home educate her children, and we talk about that and the challenges she faces as a home educator, but also as someone who is autistic herself.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live. Tune in live at ttradio.org, or to join in the conversation, download the Podbean app and search Teachers Talk Radio. Follow the hashtag TTRadio. Tune in, talk it out with Teachers Talk Radio.
Welcome to the Sunday Lunchtime Show, everyone. I'm Graham Stanley, speaking to you live from Mexico City. As I mentioned on today's show, I'll be talking to Kate about her point of view as a parent and home educator to two children with special educational needs. I'll be talking to Kate about this and more after the Teachers Talk Radio news.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Happy reading.
Are you a teacher who has concerns about your students' low reading levels? Are you also worried disadvantaged students won't be able to catch up? The online reading development program, Dreambox Reading Plus, adapts to a student's skill level, accelerates reading progress, and helps students acquire a wide vocabulary. The patented technology develops reading fluency and supports the transition to increased text complexity from Key Stage 2 to Key Stage 3 and 4, where language and vocabulary are more challenging. You can try the program with a free 4-week pilot today. Search Reading Solutions UK to find their website and request your free pilot.
How do we stop teachers marking books on their kitchen table on a Sunday night instead of wanting to spend time with their family? Is live marking truly cutting-edge practice? What if I told you that I could provide evidence of verbal feedback and its impact on student outcomes? Now, traditional marking, time and time again, is reported as the number one reason why teachers leave the profession. It trumps behaviour issues and teacher salary. In Guide to Feedback, I share 9 case study skills that demonstrate 9 different ways to provide marking and feedback, all evidenced by student outcomes. Now, not every school will be ready for this, but hopefully you are ready to start your Feed Up and Feed Forward journey.
The Teacher Toolkit Guide to Feedback is out now, and you can get an exclusive 30% discount when you order Teacher Toolkit Guide to Feedback from Bloomsbury.com. Just use the code TTRGTF at the checkout. That's TTRGTF, and it expires 30th of November. Happy reading.
Do you ever wish you could sit down with other teachers and delve into the challenges and opportunities we face? Well, that's exactly what Table Talks at Bet UK is all about. Join small roundtable discussions based on your selected topics to share insights, learn from peers, and tackle the big issues in education, all in a sponsor-free environment. This is your chance to connect and collaborate like never before. Be part of the conversation at Bet UK in January 2025. Visit uk.betshow.com to learn more.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News.
The Teacher Tap blog has published its latest update. Recent questions have focused on teachers' overall satisfaction with work at this point in the term and year. A recent question about what can cause stress for teachers suggests that student behaviour is top of the charts, followed by admin tasks and pastoral concerns for pupils. Senior school staff, however, were more likely to focus on pastoral concerns, followed by relationships with parents, and then accountability. Middle leaders feel the most stress over admin tasks. Teacher satisfaction is a key focus in any discussion on retention and recruitment, and it's recruitment that government have focused on with their latest announcement on bursaries for new teachers entering the profession. A Department for Education update published on the government website contains details for the 2025 to 2026 academic year. Bursaries in some science subjects, maths and computing, are £29,000. £10,000 is available for trainees in art and design, music and RE, with English trainees qualifying for £5,000. Bursaries for undergraduates studying for a course including QTS in some sciences, maths, computing or languages are also on offer. Full details can be found on the .gov.uk website. For support staff, legislation to reinstate their negotiating body, the SSSNB, was introduced in Parliament via the Employment Rights Bill. With many schools expressing concern over difficulties in recruiting key support staff, and those already employed concerned over low pay, this could be key. Schools Week covered the story, saying it was part of attempts to establish national terms and conditions, fair pay and career progression routes. The changes will apply to maintained schools and academies. This currently do not have to follow national pay rules. The SSSNB was scrapped in 2010, but the Department for Education said the reintroduction of it makes a key milestone in its commitment to reset the relationship with the sector. The BBC reports that a science, technology, engineering and maths event on the Isle of Man has had to be postponed due to transport issues. The fourth annual STEM Fest, which sees all the island's primary children take part, has been due to take place on the 23rd and 24th of October. The Department for Education said the decision to push back the event was taken due to significant logistical challenges as a result of bus driver shortages. The STEM event was designed to spark interest in the field of science and technology and allow young people to explore potential careers. The DFE on the island felt it was better to postpone rather than exclude some school, but the decision was regrettable. Schools Week reports that the Department for Education has scrapped a scheme forcing schools to opt out of receiving the optional Key Stage 1 SATs papers, which cost an estimated £1.6 million last year. In 2023 to 24, the Standards and Testing Agency materials, despite them being non-statutory. As fewer than 1 in 10 primaries opted out, the DFE estimated printing costs of £1.5 million. Teacher Tap survey results showed that 60% of primary teachers would continue with the Key Stage 1 SATs. However, the STA says the papers will no longer be reprinted, but made available for download instead. Schools can order hard copies of modified test papers. The Times featured the BBC Young Musician lineup, who it says shared 2 things in common: a talent for music and the fact that none of them attend a state school. The BBC competition has run for decades and is seen as a way to get young people more involved in classical music. This year there has been some criticism of the judging of the competition and the narrow selection of finalists in terms of the instrument specialisms. No woodwind, brass or percussion players. However, the editorial piece does focus more on the fact that all 6 finalists attend private or specialist music schools. The writer, Richard Morrison, goes on to describe state school music teaching as a postcode lottery. He goes on to highlight previous winners of the competition who have attended state schools, but points out that even learning an instrument can be costly and that this simply excludes many young people from developing a talent over the long term. There has been much debate over the importance of the arts in schools. The BBC Young Musician competition continues to add nuance to the debate about music. Finally, the TES reports on research by the Education Policy Institute that longer days improve students' grades. Sort of. The author of the study says it shows that pupils in schools with longer days perform better, but says further research is needed into how those hours are being spent. Schools are typically open for 190 days. Academies and free schools can be more flexible. In 2022, the previous government also laid out the expectation that all schools should deliver a school week of at least 32.5 hours. The EPI research found that in 2023 to 24, 4 in 5 primary schools and 3 in 4 secondaries met the 32.5 hour minimum. The research also shows that an additional hour of secondary school time each week is associated with a 0.17 grade improvement in one subject, whilst an additional hour in primary is associated with improvements in Key Stage 2 scale scores in maths and reading. This is consistent with international research, which points to longer school weeks having modest effects on attainment. As with all research, there are plenty of caveats. Longer days does not necessarily mean longer lessons, nor what those lessons are, or how balanced a curriculum might be. Past research says that additional hours have greatest effect when pupils are taught by their regular teacher. Being taught one-to-one or in a small group setting also helps. These are all costly for schools and indicative that more might only be better in certain circumstances. This has been your Teachers Talk Radio News with Joe Fox.
So, hello and welcome, Kate. We're going to have a conversation about home education, and I would love, Kate, for you to just start by introducing yourself, saying whatever you want to say, and also talking about how you became involved in home education.
Hi, I'm Kate, obviously. I'm a parent primarily to 2 children who I've always said are on the autistic spectrum or are auty. I used to say they're a little bit auty. Prior to this conversation, obviously, you sent me a sort of loose framework, if you like, for the conversation. And it was interesting for me to sort of try and lean into how I would explain that, because I find it really hard, particularly because I tend to talk about myself as being ADHD, which is abbreviated. This is a phrase that people may or may not yet be familiar with. It's kind of autism and ADHD, and people writing about it online, it's abbreviated to sort of a capital A, lowercase u, and then ADHD. And I talk about myself like that because it's sort of easier than explaining how my head works. But basically, I really struggled with trying to prepare for this because of how my head works. I find it really difficult to separate from being the role I am as a home educating parent to I also sort of try and support neurodivergent adults and other people's neurodivergent children, other home educators whose children may be, for want of better phrases, neurotypical. The whole sort of language, if you like, around SEN people and neurodiversity. It's a language in itself that I think I just find it very difficult to think in those. I can see why that needs to exist because it helps. I tend to adjust the language I use to depending on who I'm supporting, and how to overcome the jargon or the language, let's say. So, ADHD, SEN children, it all makes it much quicker normally to have conversations between other people who either speak the same language, i.e. teachers, and other professionals. So if you're talking to teachers and within that community, they're going to understand terms like SENCO and EdPsychs and SALT, speech and language therapists, OT, like occupational therapists, EDHPs, and the battle that many families are doing for that. Whereas when I'm speaking amongst home education communities, many of us haven't actually gone down that route. The only reason that I've gone down that route is because of my interest in child psychology and child development and schooling compared to education, and my own personal journey through identifying with what I can now see as having PTSD and school trauma, and then supporting other people, adults and children, who can look back and see that they were also affected by school trauma or PTSD, and then children now who are coming into our community with school trauma. So that's why we tend to refer to what we're doing as home education in the UK, at least, over homeschooling, because it is just semantics, it's just words. But to some children, just the word school is a trigger. I mean, my children are like that. They've never been to school, but just before I was due to come onto this call, part of that preparing them for me being shut in a room was me explaining that they are probably going to hear me talking about school, talking about schooling, talking about teaching. And my eldest in particular is really, he's got quite a lot of anxiety around what that might mean. So I've had to prepare him that if he's hearing that, I'm not talking about him. He's not going to be expected to go to school. It's nothing to do with that. It's a conversation because I'm talking about that interest and about autism as well, because he doesn't particularly like that. Neither do I. We find it all very repetitive and just talking about ourselves in that way as well. Like, we have these various disorders, and like I say, we use that terminology because it's easier sometimes, and it is useful. Like, I feel a lot more confident as an adult saying I have ADHD, whereas over the course of my life, I've been sort of called other things with much more negative connotations, like, oh, you're just a perfectionist, or you've got OCD, or and it's diet and my food has always been a big thing for me. So I've always been sort of called a fussy child and things like that. And
So,
so,
Kate,
sorry.
Can you talk a little bit about, if you want to, of course, how your experience of school was? And I'm imagining your experience of school is one of the big reasons why you decided to home educate. Is that right?
Well, it is and it isn't. It wasn't. It wasn't. At first, I was much more pro home ed rather than anti-school. Where I am now, I'm still very pro home ed.
So how did you start becoming
a
home educator?
To me, it's just an extension of what I was doing already, which was parenting. I'm just parenting.
What is home education for you?
So for me, it's just an extension of parenting. Like, for me personally, I find it really difficult to separate myself from speaking for the home educating community, because a lot of families approach home education as they are providing education from home.
Yeah.
My focus is less on academic skills and more about preparing my children to join, to be self-sufficient, to develop their own self-confidence. I put priority on mental and physical health, I think. I suppose my interest in it all started when they were born, when they were children, and I was doing attachment. What I now understand was like attachment parenting. There's so much I want to say that I feel needs to be said. And where do I start with it? Because I'm now educating or parenting a 13 and 11-year-old. When I started, they were 4 and 2. So a lot of my interest then was more about IFIS kind of level, so I took an interest in that. One of the first books I read was about pathways to language, because my 2-year-old was learning to speak much faster than his 4-year-old brother ever did. And he was learning to speak, but showing no interest in learning to read whatsoever, and has only just started to read at 11, whereas my youngest wasn't really, and still doesn't particularly speak until very recently, and he's now 13, where he's become much more confident in his speech. He was reading by 4, and that was completely sort of self-directed. And I was just observing them, and I was just trying to find out how to reach them, how to reach him in particular, my eldest, because he first showed signs of autism, or what we understand as autism, at around about 2. He was doing all the standard. He wasn't making eye contact. He was having meltdowns, and I didn't really know how to reach him, just to get simple things done. It wasn't about education then. It was just about leaving the house. It was just about getting him to look at me. Why couldn't I get him to sort of look me in the eye and just get any information at all? So I started reading up on things like his diet. So I started cutting certain things, I started finding out about that, and sugar, and I'm completely sugar free. I have to be to manage my ADHD. Otherwise, I can't think clearly. I think we're now obviously entering a different time where we are getting sidetracked into diagnosing people with things and then stopping there. We're not kind of trying to look at what's causing that, how that's presenting in us, all of us at any age. So like I say, I'm sugar free. If I'm not, then I can't manage my emotions very well. I don't recall information very well. I can't plan. And that's the same for my youngest, who's ADHD as well. So he becomes kind of unreachable if he's kind of eaten the wrong things, or he's overstimulated in the wrong way. So yeah, my initial interest in it was when they were much, much younger, and I started a degree. I started looking into child psychology, attachment parenting, and the theory behind that, and how to approach children, how obviously the John Holt, I've read both of those, how children fail and how children learn.
Hey, can you talk a little bit about attachment parenting? Because that's something that I don't know anything about.
So attachment parenting is a theory by John Bowlby, I think. And that is based around the idea that in his original theory, it's based primarily around the idea of mums, a mother being the secure attachment, the consistent person. But in terms of being inclusive, it doesn't have to be the mum, it can be the father. But the idea is that every child should benefit from having one trusted adult. This can be a grandparent, but it's that one person, and that person is with them. And it means that you can reassure them, and you also just become so attuned to their sensory needs, just tiny. You notice whether or not they're upset in an environment and how their behavior changes. And so you can adjust situations for them, and you start to notice a lot of parents who are now noticing neurodivergent characteristics in themselves. It's because they are acting in that way. They are with their child all the time, and you become so much more aware of the sensory processing needs of your children. So you notice when you walk into a room, if a room is too bright or if a room is too cold. You notice if we're going into like busier spaces, smells that might be overwhelming, and because you start noticing the changes in them, then you start sort of reflecting on, actually I'm like that as well. And maybe that means that I'm neurodivergent. And one of the first things for me was that one of the books I read quite early on was called Sensory Perceptual Issues in Autism and Asperger's Syndrome, which is quite a mouthful. It's quite I wouldn't say it's a starter.
Not an easy read.
It's not an easy read. Well, I found it easy because this is a lot of it. For me, a lot of the things that I was noticing about the kids it was obvious. It was obvious to me. Well, they're doing such and such, they're behaving in certain ways. Well, that's obvious. We're in a busy place. They can't hear me. I need to get down to their level. I need to look them in the eye. I used to do something with James where I'd do, can you put your headphones on and your glasses like this? And I'd sort of do that with both hands. I've got one of my hands is holding my phone, so that I know that you're listening to me. Or I do sort of thumbs up, thumbs down for things, because he was basically nonverbal.
So asking for feedback.
And just getting him
in that way to use his hands.
Yeah, and to get him to sort of almost come and join me in a little kind of bubble outside of whatever was going on, so that I could just give him an instruction or something like that. And I used to witness other people at playgrounds and stuff, they're just calling out children's names and children are not responding. And, to me, that was obvious, because they were all the way over there, and you could see that they were engaged, completely focused in what they were doing. And not, even if they can hear you, this is more interesting. They're not going to come back, especially if when they finally do come back, they're going to be met with a negative sort of, why didn't you come back when I called you? Could you not hear me? And I started sort of noticing little things about that. And then I read more on sort of schemas. You may or may not be familiar with like the 9 sort of play schemas, which again, to me, they were sort of obvious. And it wasn't until, like I say, I read this book, and the author Olga, I've got it here, Olga Bogdashina, quite another mouthful. In the book, it was the first book I'd read where she was referring to autistic people and non-autistic people, and everything that she was sort of saying that was about autistic people tend to see the world like this. Autistic people. Suddenly I thought, oh, okay, I think I may be an autistic person then, because that's how I see things. And to say one of my other heroines, if you like, people that I find fascinating is Temple Grandin, who is a very famous autistic scientist as well. So she's had her brain scanned. I'm fascinated with the brain. As I say, that was where it first started, really, was looking at child psychology. But over the last decade, I'm just fascinated with just people, just how we all learn. Most recently, what I've now recognized more in myself is this term. Let me just check. I think it's adult learners. So these are people who, or children who learn language in chunks. And then, so they may present as with sort of echolate, where we sort of repeat things, whole words, whole phrases and things like that. And that's how we learn. And so the way I've sort of learned over my life has been every new bit of information that I take on, or every new book that I read, I'm constantly trying to sort of slot it in somewhere to this whole picture of knowledge. And that's why I then struggle to sort of start or stop writing the book that I've always wanted to write, or partaking in a conversation like today, because it's like, where do I even start? You know, yes, I'm a parent, but I'm also supporting teachers who are neurodivergent. I'm also offering advice to parents who are not neurodivergent, or certainly don't think they are, even though sometimes it's quite obvious they probably are. They certainly don't think they are, but they're trying to support a neurodivergent child. There's some recent research that is coming out now where we're sort of figuring out the fact that we've obviously now got a huge number of adults who are understanding that they are undiagnosed neurodivergent people. And they are obviously already in professional positions where they are maybe diagnosing autistic people. And what happens if we've got, say, a neurotypical doctor trying to diagnose neurodivergent people, or a neurodivergent child, and if the neurodivergent child has neurodivergent parents, those parents are going to see that child's behaviour as, like I did, well, that's just obvious, that's just normal. Neurotypical psychologists might be like, well, actually, no, that's not how a neurotypical person would respond. And then equally, we might have a neurodivergent teacher trying to teach a neurotypical child, and all the sort of implications of that, because they're not on the same, they're literally not on the same wavelength cognitively. So it becomes very confusing. You know, people with sensory processing differences, I prefer to use rather than disorder, where a lot of, I mean, she speaks about it in this book. So a typical person tends to, if they're looking at, say, a door, I think was one of the examples she used, or a dandelion, they tend to just see the whole door. They perceive it as like a door. They're just walking through a door. They're not really, you could show them a selection of doors and they're not really going to home in particularly. It's just a door. Whereas a neuro-untypical person, I prefer to kind of use those two phrases, of any age as well. I really want to kind of stay away from children and adults, because we don't grow up. We've always been here. We haven't grown out of or into our neurodivergencies. Like we were always there. We just didn't recognize it. We didn't realize that, you know, you don't know how other people are perceiving the world, but you assume that everyone is seeing it the same as you. And that's, I think, where we're struggling. So, yeah, so a neurodivergent person might home in on the details, which is something Temple Grandin says, you know, normal, she will say normal people, which is an awful phrase, but she is, I can quote that she sort of will say, normal people do not I had it written down. They don't notice the little details. So they won't notice the difference between a metal handle compared to a wooden handle. They wouldn't walk into a classroom. Some children will walk into a classroom and they will notice a sticky table, where somebody before them has made a mess and it's really sticky. And that might be enough to just completely throw them for the whole class. They won't be able to think outside of that detail, or a particular smell, or if the teacher has moved the classroom around or something like that. Something that is just such a small detail that maybe just wouldn't affect other learners, can have just this huge impact on us.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Happy reading.
Are you a teacher who has concerns about your students' low reading levels? Are you also worried disadvantaged students won't be able to catch up? The online reading development program, Dreambox Reading Plus, adapts to a student's skill level, accelerates reading progress, and helps students acquire a wide vocabulary. The patented technology develops reading fluency and supports the transition to increased text complexity from Key Stage 2 to Key Stage 3 and 4, where language and vocabulary are more challenging. You can try the program with a free 4-week pilot today. Search Reading Solutions UK to find their website and request your free pilot.
How do we stop teachers marking books on their kitchen table on a Sunday night instead of wanting to spend time with their family? Is live marking truly cutting-edge practice? What if I told you that I could provide evidence of verbal feedback and its impact on student outcomes? Now, traditional marking, time and time again, is reported as the #1 reason why teachers leave the profession. It trumps behaviour issues and teacher salary. In Guide to Feedback, I share 9 case study skills that demonstrate 9 different ways to provide marking and feedback, all evidenced by student outcomes. Now, not every school will be ready for this, but hopefully you are ready to start your Feed Up and Feed Forward journey.
The Teacher Toolkit Guide to Feedback is out now, and you can get an exclusive 30% discount when you order Teacher Toolkit Guide to Feedback from Bloomsbury.com. Just use the code TTRGTF at the checkout. That's TTRGTF, and it expires 30th of November. Happy reading.
Do you ever wish you could sit down with other teachers and delve into the challenges and opportunities we face? Well, that's exactly what Table Talks at Bet UK is all about. Join small roundtable discussions based on your selected topics to share insights, learn from peers, and tackle the big issues in education, all in a sponsor-free environment. This is your chance to connect and collaborate like never before. Be part of the conversation at Bet UK in January 2025. Visit uk.betshow.com to learn more.
So, somebody in one of my groups, a neurodivergent teacher, recently, she posed the question to us all. She'd been given this space at the school or provision that she was working at, and she was going to be counselling teenagers, and she, it was just a space, so she was really excited, and she didn't know, as a neurodivergent as well, she just wants to go and buy stuff. Like, we really like, and home editors, we really like resources, we really like fidget toys, we like sensory equipment, we like to, it's all about the sensory when it comes to kids. It's all about sensory diets and how can we create this space that is going to provide a comfortable, safety is huge. How can we make that? How can we do that? And my response to that was something like, first and foremost for me personally, having been that teenager, I want to walk into that space where I don't feel like anything is demanding anything particular from me. I've designed my whole house around that. I don't have a telly. I don't have a 3-piece suite. It's not pointing at anything. There's lots of different options in terms of where to sit, how high to sit off the ground. When the kids were younger, I'd sort of read up quite a lot on Montessori. And so everything was child height accessible. They could just walk up and use stuff and do stuff like that. They didn't. So in terms of this space that she was creating for teenagers, a lot of teenage angst I found, and I know that other teenagers struggle with, is where to put themselves. So walking into a room, even where a neurotypical adult has designed and put in, say, a lovely carpeted area for sort of circle time, and then over in the other corner they've got sort of a table where they might think that's great, but as a teenager that demands, that creates an anxiety like, okay, I need to commit. If I'm going to sit on the carpet, that means I'm going to sort of commit to sitting there with people potentially that I won't know, talking about things that what are they going to say to me? At what point can I leave? Basically, you get sweaty palms and you don't want to sit down. So it's about how to create a flexible space. So I suggested to her, modular seating. Everything in that classroom has to be movable. It has to be able to be fluid and flexible. No fixed kind of whiteboards or blackboards or anything like that. You want sort of like flip charts that you can fold away. As I say, like module seating that you can arrange in various different ways. Tables and chairs that can be moved around. Soft things, colourful things. Mermaid cushions I've had here before where they can sort of, fidgety kind of things, fidget toys, spinners. When I first started looking into it all, there was these guys, they've made loads of videos. They're called the Asperger's Experts on YouTube. And one of the things, I think they've done a couple of versions of this video. It's about sensory funnel, which typically is funnel shaped. And the right way around, if you like, for this funnel to go is at the very top, the widest part of the funnel. We give to, just find my drawing of it, social stuff. And right at the very bottom, the most narrowest point, we give to sensory stuff. And then in between there, we've got things like, right at the bottom, we've got sensory, and then going up into sort of wider. This is in terms of sort of what's important. Sensory, emotional, then awareness, then social, then executive function. So like I say, these are two guys with Asperger's. And they were sort of saying that this is just totally wrong. This is totally wrong approach to teaching children, and also just for all of us. If we flip this upside down so that sensory stuff is the most important stuff, because once all that is dealt with, if you like, once you've met all those needs with any learner of any age, then they are safe, they're comfortable, they are able to receive whatever you're going to try and talk to them about or teach them. They're receptive of it. If you've got sensory processing disorder or your sensory needs are agitated in some way, then that you basically go into fight or flight sort of mode. Everything else shuts down, and all you can think, and you can't think past, is this, whatever it is that's upset you, because you're scared, essentially. So a lot of these disorders that we talk about nowadays, which, as I say, looking back when I was a child, I didn't have all this language that I do now. My mum says that I was always very suspicious of people. I was very quiet. What I now understand is that I was probably a lot of the time fawning, and I was masking, and I was trying to study people and figure out how to socialize by watching other people and studying them and mirroring things that they were doing and wondering why, probably a lot of time, that they were doing what they were doing, because I find normal people quite odd sometimes. I find it very difficult to sort of just do small talk without ending up talking about my special interests, which is just child psychology, or just unpacking, trauma, let's go there, and sort of, well, I can sort of see why you behave like this because of your brain, and it's really hard for me to kind of think. A parent actually said to me quite bluntly the other day, he was like, well, I suppose not everyone is that interested in special needs teaching special needs children. And I was like, I hadn't really, but it's it's very interesting. I hadn't really thought of it like that. But yeah, so I've had to change I've had to become much more aware of myself and who I'm talking to, and trying not to go off on too many tangents, because I think, actually, this person isn't interested. I've had to sort of study unspoken language, body language, and just subtle kind of changes in their tone of voice and things like that, which I can now see. I've been doing that for years. It's not like I just sort of started doing that when I became a parent. I can now understand that, I've been doing that for a long time, and that's why I found having the kids so interesting, because I just started watching them and watching how they responded to different things. I also found it really interesting that a lot of studies of children, a lot of twin studies, for example, or sibling studies, it's because the control is assumed to be the fact that these are children born at the same sort of time, into the same family, so the environmental aspect of all of that is assumed to be almost like the control, and then how the two children present differently is the variable sort of thing. Whereas with my two, so my eldest, when he was born, he was obviously the only one that he was the only baby person that I was looking after. Whereas when my youngest was born, there was an older sibling in the house. So there were two. So that's different. When my youngest was born, we lived in a flat. There was no outdoor area. I was totally uneducated, if you like, in all of this. So I was coming at it from a very typical parent. I was quite authoritarian. I had certain expectations of that children would just kind of do what they were told, which is ridiculous. It's ridiculous. Children don't want to do what they're told. That's just, we seem to think, certainly in the UK, we have all these expectations, demands that so a lot of, again, this current narrative is based around the fact that an awful lot of parents, because I'm in other groups online as well, a lot of the posts that come up, they're like, why is my child behaving like this? Why are they doing this? Why are they doing that? Because they are still of the idea that this is an unnormal reaction. These behaviors are not is not a normal way for a child to behave, whereas actually it's perfectly normal. Once you have an understanding of child psychology and age and stage and sort of the various different development things, as I say, schemas. So should I outline the 9 schemas for anyone?
Yes, that would be useful, I
Unfamiliar
think.
with those? So schemas, so trajectory, rotation, enclosing, enveloping, transporting, connecting and disconnecting, positioning, and orientation, transforming. So to kind of make that understandable, what that translates to is when you're watching children at play. My youngest in particular was great at this because he was very into small world play, whereas my eldest not particularly. So he would go out in the garden and he was, and still is, completely entirely focused on creatures. So those were his small world toys. I didn't have to really provide him with Lego or dolls or anything. So trajectory is obviously like throwing stuff around. Parents don't like children just chucking stuff around, but they need to, because trajectory, that's them trying to figure out how things move. What happens when they throw a glass on the floor, it smashes. Really inconvenient when you're a parent for things to smash and break.
Yes.
Or if they start banging stuff against the telly, and that's just massively, we don't like that. Rotation, spinning things or spinning themselves. So a lot of children, fidget spinners, they like spinning themselves. It's how they regulate themselves. When they were really little, one of my friends' mums, who worked as a childminder for years. She's older and retired now, but she recommended The Reason I Jump, which have you heard of that? The Reason I Jump?
I haven't.
So I would say to anyone in the world, just read that. Just read The Reason I Jump and start there, because it's written by at the time he was 13 years old, non-verbal autistic boy. Yeah. And it's very accessible in that most of the pages, that there are sort of longer, more longer prose, like sort of text paragraphs and stuff, but most of the pages are questions like why do we like the color green? Why do we like being out in nature? And then just kind of quite accessible answers. But really, once you've read that, the answer to most questions is just because we like it. The kids do stuff because they like doing stuff. ADHD people, we seem to be normalizing this phrase, dopamine, follow the dopamine. Dopamine's the happiness hormone that the brain releases because we're super happy. We're gonna want to do things that make us happy, and kids do stuff because they want to do it. It's not a mystery to me. What you can do is create safer ways for them to do that. Don't give them glass stuff when they're too young to have it, but don't have ornaments around, and then try and expect them not to want to interact with them, because that was certainly how I adjusted my house, because I didn't want to interrupt stuff that I see, that I think the schemas are necessary. So I think it's about thinking about in classrooms or outside of class, whoever you're dealing with, it's at whatever age, like say teenagers, whatever, it's about trying to create an environment where there is no demand to adjust how you are. You can just be in that space. You can interact with that space. There's no demand on you to alter your behavior necessarily. So you can just feel comfortable. As I say, so I'll carry on with the schemas. Enclosing things, that's sort of putting things inside of matchboxes, stuff like that, Tupperware. So I always gave my youngest sort of lots of Tupperware, he'd put stuff in it, pour stuff out of it, enveloping. So that's like he'd have a bit of paper and he'd want to sort of wrap things up and then unwrap it, transporting things. So it's like putting things in and out of buckets, carrying stuff about, tipping stuff outside of buckets, playing with toys that have like a dumper truck kind of thing, you're putting things in and out of the back of it, connecting and disconnecting things, so again, that's hugely problematic if you've got children that are taking things apart that you don't want to be taking apart, but they just want to do that. They want to see what's inside. I remember talking to one parent years ago, and she had identified this as an specifically autistic thing that her son did, where he was obsessed with sort of taking apart machinery, and things like the smoke alarm and stuff, and basically breaking things because he was wanting to see how they worked. And again, I kind of just think, well, obviously, but this is where I've come to realize that, okay, maybe that's just how I think. But obviously, I've always wanted to know how things work, and Temple Grandin always appealed because obviously she's famous for her book Thinking in Pictures, and it wasn't until I saw her TED talk that I even heard of her. But just this idea that not everyone thinks in pictures. I think in pictures, so I can imagine in my brain schematic kind of diagrams of things. It's like she describes, if she's asked to sort of think of something, then her brain will conjure up lots of different images of that thing, because like pictures, and then you can sort of play them back, like little videos, and it means that I can be quite efficient with my ideas and things, because I almost don't have to carry out experiments that like other children would necessarily have to do. I can think about an idea, I can imagine whether or not that's going to fit or work, and then sort of think, no, I don't need to actually bother doing that. Whereas a lot of children want to bother to do it. That's how they're going to sort of learn whether or not that works. Positioning, I think that's just lining things up. So again, that's a huge sort of people associate this with, that must be autism, because they're lining everything up. But actually, that's kind of fairly normal. And when you look at toys, we're actively kind of providing. People don't seem to associate it with autism, that they go out and buy sorting toys, where they're all sort of different colours and you have to sort things into the different colours. That's because that's kind of a fairly typical way of categorize it. Adults do that. We like to work in tidy places. We organize things. We don't like things miscellaneous clutter. We're all about decluttering and organizing our space so that we can think more clearly. We notice that. We don't think anything out that is odd about us sort of like manically pacing around or chewing on the end of our pen. But when children do it, we think, oh, they're kind of, but it's self-soothing, but we call it stimming, so there's this constant, and this is why I struggle. And this is why I struggled preparing for today, because I find it incredibly difficult to keep going between that different language of what is normal and typical and what is non-normal and untypical. And because of my background in, I did philosophy in A level, and then I've since kind of looked at what would you call it, a sort of approach to teaching, I suppose, called Philosophy for Children, or P4, the number 4C, where you just kind of, and listening culture is something that we try and develop within schools, where I started my degree. So again, I've gone off on lots of different tangents, but I try and draw all those things together all the time, where you're just creating an environment where people can just share their ideas and guide them. So philosophy for children, you're introducing quite complex ideas. Maybe you might start introducing an idea, say, with philosophy in mind, say sort of like the greater good. How can we do so? You've got one person that might be affected or killed, is an example I've heard discussed sometimes, that's put to children. How can we deal with a situation where one person might die, but we'd save 100 people? And how do we approach that? Is that one person? But then you just let that conversation fly, so you're not trying to suggest anything. You're not trying to see any taboo or problem with how one child might respond to that. Because sometimes I think when we're looking through adult eyes or teacher eyes or parent eyes, I see it come up quite a lot in one of the groups I'm in, which is for autistic girls. So it's quite often the mothers, so a female brain, a neurotypical female brain maybe, responding to what they see as an autistic young teenager. They're very concerned sometimes with sort of how this teenager might be talking about maybe a subject that we already have developed quite a lot of stigma around, or massive concern over whether or not they're sort of sexualizing something, or they're I don't know, sort of whether or not they're being bullied, or there's all these words that we use that carry all this weight to them. And actually, this young person hasn't got that. They're not looking at it through those goggles. They're just trying to make sense of something that they just haven't figured out yet. And I think we need to try and give children, from as young an age appropriate as we can, we need to try and introduce language for them to explore topics around their feelings and their emotions, and like I said before, their sensory experiences of things. We're far too lazy, particularly in the UK. We are really lazy at introducing language around sort of feelings and context and things with kids. We're very quick to just be like, oh, be careful, like, be careful, don't do that, stop doing this, stop doing that, don't do that, be careful. And we'll just kind of say that about lots of different things. And we're not really explaining why. We're not explaining, how to be careful. Or we're preempting. We might be feeling cold. So we're sort of suggesting things like, you're going to get cold. You need this, So we're putting all that on the child. We're actually teaching them their own senses, if you like. So instead of them recognizing what it feels like to be cold, because some kids actually like being cold, at sensory seekers and sensory avoiders. Some kids, well, I would say all people, actually, sometimes we want to get colder and sometimes we want to warm up. So, it's all about control, I think, and control of our own environment and control of our own bodies and systems. And we're just completely out of touch with that a lot of the time. The senses is another thing I wanted to mention, because most people obviously know the first 5, but there are 4 more that we now sort of recognise.
So what are those, Kate?
So those are thermoception, which is the sense of temperature, as I say. The sense of pain and sensation, which I think is pronounced nociception. So this is another one of interest to me. But the other 2 anyway are vestibular sense, or equilibrioception, which is like the sense of balance and acceleration. So
Mhm.
if you've ever been in a car and somebody's gone over a bump too fast and you get that like jolt in your tummy, it's
Yeah.
that sort of awareness, that internal awareness of where you are in the
Or if
space.
you've ever had vertigo, I suppose, as well.
Yeah, so I get a lot of that. I certainly, as I've gotten older, I get a lot of kind of balance things, and also and probably the most important is the kinesthetic sense, or it's certainly in most of what I've read, it's usually the proprioception, which is where we are in relation to other people, where we are in relation to other things. It's how we are in that space. And interestingly, another kind of thing that we tend to associate with autistic people, ADHD and PDA as well, which is pathological demand avoidance, which is a fairly new ASD term. And I still don't think it's actually recognised in the DSM-5, which is the big book of sort of diagnoses and various different things that is used professionally speaking, is we tend to look at kids and think they're being clumsy sometimes, this sort of clumsiness, because they might walk down a corridor or they might be in a classroom and they're kind of interactive. They insist on sort of pushing other children, touching other kids, not necessarily aggressively or anything, but they might sort of, or they'll walk down a corridor and they'll appear to be clumsy because they're sort of banging and ricocheting on and off of stuff around them, or people are standing too close. They haven't got that sort of awareness of personal space or your individual personal space. They might prefer to, again, like I said earlier, they're just doing what makes them feel more comfortable. So they might prefer to be quite close to a parent, or I've witnessed an autistic boy when he was very young. His mother described him as being really tactile. And I know an older boy now, actually, he's the same. So he will always run up and hug me, even though really he does not know me very well. And other adults might perceive that as being kind of over certain boundaries because I'm not his parent, I'm not. And that sort of, but I completely understand the need for that. This is a sort of need that children, that they're always trying to get their needs met, all of their behavior, whatever they're doing, there's a reason behind that. And I think we're really letting them down in the UK, as I say, because like more worldwide, I think it's a lot more accepted, like education, parenting, it's approached in totally different ways. But in the UK particularly, I've found we are not meeting the needs, or we're just not understanding why people behave like they do. We seem to expect children to behave in a certain way, and when they don't, we're assuming that that's something that is wrong with them, something that we need to recognize and get diagnosed. And we're not really looking beyond that sometimes. We're just like, oh, that's where we're kind of stopping. Oh, well, that's to be expected because they've got ADHD. So they're going to be fidgeting around because they've got ADHD. Actually, we're really good at focusing. Like, we are really, 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 really good at focusing. It's not a deficit. Like, a lot of us don't see it that way. Like, if it's stuff that we're interested in and we're hyper-focused on it, this conversation is a classic kind of example of that. Temple Grandin said, she said, let me find it, the autistic mind tends to be a specialist mind, good at one thing, bad at something else. So anyone not familiar with Temple Grandin, her specialism, quite bizarrely, she's quite a bizarre person, really, if you've never watched her. She's American, and her specialism is in building slaughterhouses, basically. She got very good at doing that with animals, because she could see, like I am with kids, I guess, she sort of looked at how animals were behaving, and in the sort of way that these structures for dealing with cattle and things, why were these animals playing up, basically? Why were they reluctant to walk off to their fate? And so she would jump down and see it through their eyes, and she would recognize things like the metal rattling around, that's gonna upset cows, and how can we adjust this environment for them to be more passive and to just wander off to be slaughtered much more calmly. And so as a vegetarian, I don't really advocate for any of that. I think that's awful. But as a person learning, when, right at the beginning of the journey of all this, I was like, that seemed quite obvious to me. How can we keep people calmer? How can we design spaces that children are more relaxed, or how can we just accept that, okay, that kid's spinning, obviously they want to spin, go and ask them, go and say, is that my kid? He was all about jumping, so I have a rebounder. I read a book about occupational therapy. So I suppose why I've ended up where I am today is because, from my experience then and still now, obviously, because it's all kicking off now, we're all a bit raw from the conversation that's recently taken place on the Woman's Hour, which is still available to listen to on BBC Sounds, where we in the UK, we're starting to finally start this conversation about how can we better meet the needs of our SEN kids, and how we're not managing to do that currently. And just sort of recognizing that, asking them why they're doing a thing. And like I said before, recognizing that they're just doing it to sort of calm themselves down. That all behavior is kind of communication. So, and recognizing that a lot of these disorders are actually anxiety driven. So understanding that if you've got people in the classroom or people at work, so I support a lot of people who are neurodivergent, and they're still trying to work, particularly teachers. So teachers who are neurodivergent, who are trying to teach in a busy school, they themselves are now starting to figure out, they're finding that really stressful, because if they're ADHD, say, they struggle with executive planning skills, starting and stopping things, doing lesson plans. They're struggling to do that. They're struggling to do the job that they know they want to be able to do it. And teachers, children, there's stuff we want to do, but planning it, starting it, stopping it, managing to not let our brains go off on tangents. So I'm supporting those people as well in the workplace. And like I say, so if you've got learners that are starting to get agitated in the classroom, why are they doing that? And what can we do in the classroom to try and sort of allow them to do whatever it is maybe that they need to do to calm down. So rather than them spinning, provide them with something else that they can spin if that's their thing, like I say. So that's what I started to say. So my youngest, he was all about bouncing. So I got a rebounder, a small trampoline, basically, inside in an indoors one. So he spent probably up until very recently, so maybe up until he was about 8 or 9, just bouncing naked, mostly, to be honest, because he's got sensory. He just didn't want to wear clothes. Didn't wear shoes, walking about outside, really. So I had to let go a lot of my concerns over that. I didn't really have a lot of concerns over that because I understood where that was coming from for him, because I've got my own, I like to wear cotton. I don't really like to wear synthetic fabric-y stuff. Like, I've got all that going on. So I don't really like seams on my socks either. So I don't make my eldest wear socks, because this is just why? Pick your battles. Who says that, you have to do these things? But I did find that other people, and they still are, sort of like, but, they question it. They're concerned by it, like, but and I think we have to let go of a lot of that.
Kate,
And obviously,
I'd like to, sorry for interrupting, but I'd love to hear more about how you got involved with supporting neurodivergent teachers.
So one of my friends, I don't think she'd mind me calling her that now. So she is Katrina Lowry. So she's spoken on here before, actually, with another person. And she set up Neuroteachers, which is her own company. She's got a whole background in Senko that I won't go into. That's her sort of story. But I'm, through knowing her online, completely out of the context of any of that, actually, and talking to her a lot online, she obviously identified, I think we just find each other, to be honest, us neuro and typical people. We tend to home in on each other. And I've joined that community. There's a group online. So there's her company, Neuroteachers, but then there is an online Facebook group, community for neurodivergent teachers. And she's currently now going around the UK working alongside schools, either and providing training for within the school setting to help neurodivergent teachers understand their neuro untypical ways, and also helping all of us, parents and teachers, because there's a lot of both in the group, how we are helping our learners. So obviously, as a home educator, I'm doing that role, but as an adult with ADHD or ADHD kind of tendency, I also kind of step in, and I want to join in the conversation with how to support the adult as well all the time, or the family behind. So this is, like I said at the beginning, it's why I find it very difficult to sort of separate myself out into particular roles, because I'm always trying to simultaneously see the perspective from the teenage girl that I was at school, who struggled with school, the mother that I am now, trying to raise boys as well. So I do try and be gender neutral, and always have done, but boys, there's no getting out the fact that there is boyish behavior and girlish behavior, and how we react and respond accordingly. We're much more accepting of boyish behaviors when boys are doing those behaviors than we are to girls being boyish. And I was a boyish girl growing up. So I think perhaps, and maybe my mum was as well, she was one of 5, 3 brothers. So again, she wouldn't have necessarily seen how I was being as particularly strange. So there's that sort of backup there. So yeah, moving myself from all those different positions, and also so I'm trying to raise my 2 boys into what, as a mother, trying to support them now, and also trying to recognize that eventually they will be teenage and adult men. And so as a mother now, I kind of need them a lot of the time to end up doing what I want them to do. But I also don't want them ending up learning that they are allowed to control or criticize whatever partner they end up with. Does that kind of make sense? You're always trying to sort of.
Yeah, it sounds like it's a
It's
very
quite a
thin line
complex.
between
Yeah.
being accepting and trying to understand and accommodate and cater for their needs, and actually trying to prepare them for a society that has certain norms and expectations. It's that, isn't it? And also make sure that they end up being responsible, caring adults. It's a difficult job, I can imagine.
And I suppose with my particular background, so I've been in toxic kind of relationships, abusive relationships. So I'm quite sort of trauma informed in that sense. So that informs a lot of how I've approached home ed. In terms of I can look back now with the benefit of hindsight and think and that's why I'm growing in confidence, I suppose, in myself now to my younger self, in that it makes perfect sense to me now why I am like I am now, based on everything I know about the brain and how it works, and fight or flight, and temple grandin, and where she's had her brain scan, amygdala which is the part of the brain that's sort of responsible for almost like our it's like a lot of psychologists call it like our reptilian brain or our animal brain.
Right. Yeah.
So it's again it relates to the senses. So animals use it in the sense that if they are freaked out, if they're in a situation where they're scared, all of their other systems shut down to prepare themselves to fight or fly, or run away or whatever. And a lot of children are behaving in certain ways or stimming because they're at baseline scared. They're in fight or flight. They're anxious. ADHD, pathological demand avoidance, these are recognized to be anxiety-driven disorders. They are anxious. Our kids are unhappy for whatever reason. And unhappy is quite depending on who I'm speaking to, like it's quite it carries a weight to it. So a lot of parents don't want to think that their kids are traumatized. They don't want to think their kids are unhappy. Teachers don't want to, or they're maybe not seeing that this kid is anxious. I know when my eldest was younger, it took me a long time to recognize that meltdowns, I started calling some of his behaviors melt-ups, because a meltdown is more associated with, people often mistake a meltdown to a tantrum, and there's a big difference to a sort of classic toddler, I want these sweets, give them to me tantrum, and a full-on shutdown, meltdown, explosive thing where the kid is just past, you can't get him back out of it. My eldest, he would have melt-ups at bedtime because the demand was too high. And I would just get really angry. It was really annoying. I needed him to go to sleep, and he would be hyperactive. So he'd be laughing. That's why I called it a melt up, because looking at it, and you see it in adults as well. Like I'm a bit like it today because I'm having a bit of a melt up, I suppose, where I'm just super anxious. I've got loads of stuff I want to say. And so I'm presenting as being really hyper and really happy. And actually inside I'm really anxious, and this is going really badly. That's how I feel about it. It's like I've got loads of stuff to cover, and am I going to cover it all? And he would be the same.
I am going to have to stop you because I have to draw things to a close. But this has been fascinating. It's really helped give me some insight into, autism, ADHD, and other things that you've talked about, and a lot of the things you've been sharing with me and with everyone else when this is broadcast will be really useful, I think, in understanding. I think it's that listening to experience from yourself and others who are dealing with things like this is the way forward, I think. So I want to thank you very much for agreeing to participate in this. And I appreciate that it hasn't been at times easy for you to kind of think about, the anxiety you've had, thinking about how to put across what you want to put across. But I think you've done a very good job of explaining your situation. And I'm sure the people listening the teachers listening, for example, will be very appreciative of it. I certainly am. So thank you very much.
Okay.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Happy reading.
Are you a teacher who has concerns about your students' low reading levels? Are you also worried disadvantaged students won't be able to catch up? The online reading development program, Dreambox Reading Plus, adapts to a student's skill level, accelerates reading progress, and helps students acquire a wide vocabulary. The patented technology develops reading fluency and supports the transition to increased text complexity from Key Stage 2 to Key Stage 3 and 4, where language and vocabulary are more challenging. You can try the program with a free 4-week pilot today. Search Reading Solutions UK to find their website and request your free pilot.
How do we stop teachers marking books on their kitchen table on a Sunday night instead of wanting to spend time with their family? Is live marking truly cutting-edge practice? What if I told you that I could provide evidence of verbal feedback and its impact on student outcomes? Now, traditional marking, time and time again, is reported as the #1 reason why teachers leave the profession. It trumps behaviour issues and teacher salary. In Guide to Feedback, I share 9 case study skills that demonstrate 9 different ways to provide marking and feedback, all evidenced by student outcomes. Now, not every school will be ready for this, but hopefully you are ready to start your Feed Up and Feed Forward journey.
The Teacher Toolkit Guide to Feedback is out now, and you can get an exclusive 30% discount when you order Teacher Toolkit Guide to Feedback from Bloomsbury.com. Just use the code TTRGTF at the checkout. That's TTRGTF, and it expires 30th of November. Happy reading.
Do you ever wish you could sit down with other teachers and delve into the challenges and opportunities we face? Well, that's exactly what Table Talks at Bet UK is all about. Join small roundtable discussions based on your selected topics to share insights, learn from peers, and tackle the big issues in education, all in a sponsor-free environment. This is your chance to connect and collaborate like never before. Be part of the conversation at Bet UK in January 2025. Visit uk.betshow.com to learn more.
So that brings us to the end of today's Sunday Lunchtime Show. Many thanks to today's special guest, Kate, for joining me, and to all of you who joined us live, and also to those listening back to the recording. That's it from me. There are Teachers Talk radio shows all week on all manner of interesting topics, so please listen in live or back to the recordings. And I hope you will join me again next week at the same time. Bye for now.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.